Welcome to the Board Game Community Show. I'm your host, Riley Stock, and today we're getting to know an awesome member of the board game community who does his own podcast with a group of awesome friends, Board Game Hot Takes, and its host, co-host, there's multiple hosts, I guess, I don't know, Tim. How you doing, Tim?
Hello, everybody. Good. I'm good. Thanks for having me, Riley.
Yeah, that was such a professional introduction from one podcaster to the next.
Yeah, we call ourselves co-hosts because we do have a group of us that are on there all the time, and I tend to be the one that kind of pushes the conversation forward. But I give everyone gets the same credit there. They're all working just as hard.
Yeah, exactly. I was listening to one this morning, and I think Chris started it. And he kind of took on your role. I mean, this is a couple months back. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, is this the normal thing before a few months ago? I don't know.
No, that was probably the board game tables one. And that was a topic that he specifically wanted to talk about. So he, well, maybe not. Sometimes we switch out who does the intro just to kind of mix it up a little bit. But with that particular, with the board game tables episode, he kind of brought up the topic and he wanted to drive the conversation because he was doing it for his own personal research. So maybe that's one you're listening to, but the intro gets swapped out once in a while.
Nice. It was Rap Gods. I just looked.
Okay. Got it.
Because it's current. I was listening to it just shortly before we were getting together. So
yeah, it makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. It's fun having a podcast. I know you listen to podcasts. You talk about that on your show.
Yeah.
It's fun having a new podcast to listen to because you have that huge backlog.
That's right.
And I know now how many exactly that is because you just did your 1-year anniversary.
Yeah, it's fun. I've been listening to board game podcasts for a long time. It's one of the, you probably heard that on the anniversary episode. We kind of talk about our background and why we started making the podcast. But I've always, when I discover a new podcast show, it's like it always takes me a few episodes to get into it. The first episode, you're just hearing these random voices. You don't know who they are. But if I stick with it for an episode or two and you start to hear, learn their personalities and start to get to know the different people on there, then I get hooked. And then I'll go back and do like what you just did and, start listening all the way back. That's always fun.
Exactly. It was for a while. I thought that because I had listened a couple months back. And then I lost my listening time. And I think it was an episode with Steve, who's your brother, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And so, I didn't learn the voices or anything and couldn't remember. But I was like, I know one of them's his brother. And so I thought it was Adam for some reason. And so for a long time, I thought it was Adam that was your brother until this anniversary episode where it corrected it.
That's funny. I would suspect that we confuse people a lot because I've been on every episode. Adam's been on almost every one, and Chris has been kind of our third. So most of the time, if you listen, you're going to hear us three. But then when one of us can't make it, then Steve or our friend Jen have kind of, filled in. So I would guess that if you came in at a time when like Jen was on there, you're going to be like, oh, great, there's a female voice on this show. But then you only hear her every, 5 to 7 episodes or something like that. So it's not normal, but it's worked really well for us because we, when we put this together, we're all working professionals. We all have families. We all have like a lot of things going on. And so we wanted to make it as easy as possible. And I specifically put the format together so we could swap people in and out. And hopefully, at some point I'd like to even do nights where we bring in, guests from outside, so like have somebody on play a game with us and have them part of the review process. So I kind of made the format flexible like that. And that's been great for us because if somebody can't make it, no big deal. We just pull another person in. But I would assume it's a little bit of a whiplash if you don't listen to the show regularly.
Yeah. You've had a guest on there before, haven't you?
We've done a couple interviews, but never done, one of the things I would like to do at some point is bring in another reviewer, someone else who's creating board game reviews and stuff like that, and have them come in and do what we do, which is we sit down, we play a game, and we do it on Tabletop Simulator or Tabletopia. Because we're all in different locations, but we play a game and then we immediately talk about it afterwards and kind of give our review or our thoughts on it. And so it'd be fun to have somebody come on and actually go through that whole process with us as an outsider, somebody who we haven't done that with before.
Yeah, that would be really fun. I'll do it. Sure.
All right. We'll make it happen.
Yeah, that was an invite, obviously. You all heard it. No, I didn't invite myself. I'm not a great reviewer. I never know how to express my thoughts very well. I don't know. That's why I like to just ask a question and then I can be quiet and listen.
Yeah, it's reviewing is interesting and something that I think does come with practice a little bit. And I'm still learning and still getting feedback and, recognizing, like, when I go back and listen to an episode, aside from, potential audio quality issues or me, stumbling through my words, sometimes I'll listen and be like, wow, I didn't need to be that harsh. Like I didn't intend to present something that way. And when you're just doing it on a podcast, it's not like writing. You can't sit there and re-edit and say like, oh, you know what, that's not quite the right word I wanted to use. You just keep going. And so sometimes, on a podcast, you just talk through stuff, and you'll hear it today. I'm sure I'll stumble through some things. You'll be like, what did he even mean when he just said that? But, just keep going with it. But with the reviews, I have gotten, I think, better at being willing to be critical and also trying to, but I think getting better at expressing why we're critical about something. When we start out, we love board games and we love the people creating them for us. And so we're not, we don't want to be mean. We don't want to pick on games. And so it's easier to just be like, yeah, I love all these things about it. But I think it's a value to listeners as well to kind of hear what you didn't like about it or what didn't work. And I think we're getting better at that.
I really like it because you go on Twitter or you go on YouTube and you watch videos and they really like hype up the games.
Yeah.
Some of them are being paid to, so they should be hyping it up. And so I'll see a game and I'll be really, really hyped for it and be like, I should probably buy this. But then I've listened to your episodes on some of them and you give a very honest, all of you do a really good job of like portraying it as it actually is as a player. And each of you have different likes and dislikes. Yeah. And I love that. And I think it gives a lot to like de-escalate my hype into impulse buying. And sometimes I want to buy a game more after I listen and sometimes less, like Windward.
Yeah.
I know. I was like, I really liked that episode and it made me really interested, but it was actually like on my list to buy. And now it's on my list to try because there were some things that I was like, okay, well, that sounds like it would be a rough mechanic, and I don't know if I would like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think that's a game that's worth trying before you buy it. I think it could be a good experience for some people, but you heard my thoughts on it. It definitely wasn't. I'm glad that I didn't buy it. Let me just put it that
way. Yeah,
but yeah, it's aside from just trying to get better at offering that value. One of the places that I'm a little uncomfortable doing it. You mentioned we've had some designers on our show that we've interviewed. We've interviewed Jamie Stegmeyer and we've interviewed James Wilson of Everdell fame. And we interviewed another kind of a designer who just put out his first game, Gary Dworetsky. And, we have these nice conversations and get to know folks, and then we review their games. And that is something that's still like, we did the Red Rising review, which we were all pretty, we were fairly fond on. Chris was not a big fan during the review process, but it definitely was. When I had a criticism to say, it stung a little bit to, after having just talked to Jamie Stegmeyer a couple weeks earlier and Alex Schmidt a couple weeks earlier about it, it stung a little bit to raise a concern. So that's something I'm working to get past. And now I've got another hurdle is that I just recently realized like there are games I really want to talk about on the show, but I don't want to buy them. So I thought, we've got an audience now. Let's reach out to the publishers and see if they want us to send us a copy. And so far, every game I've asked for, the publishers have sent me a copy on. It's not many because we're being pretty picky about what we're playing and what we're reviewing. But that's also something that I'm going to be putting together some of my thoughts on a couple of those review copies pretty soon. And that's something I have to be very aware of that, it was really nice of the publisher to send that to me, but I still want to do the podcast in the same way. I still want to offer the same value to the listeners. So that's something that's I think, we're going to do our best at continuing to be honest about.
I can't even imagine. Well, I guess I can't. I was on an episode of Organized Fun, which you were on an episode of Organized Fun.
Yep.
And they got an advance copy of something coming to Kickstarter, and we kind of tore it apart.
Was that little 52 card deck
Yeah.
game? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so it was like, yeah, it had some merits and stuff, but and then he tagged
Yeah.
the publisher in the thing, and I was like, oh gosh, but they had a good back and forth about it. Like it was a productive feedback thing, and
Okay.
they were grateful for the information. So it worked out, but at the same time, it's just like, I don't want to break anybody's heart. Or,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, that's one of the nice things is that we're still, I think, small enough. We're not on most publishers or designers' radars, and so when I'm posting stuff on social media about a review we did, I usually won't, tag the designer or the publisher if it was a really negative review. If it was a mixed review, I'll still tag them. If it was, if one of our team members really liked it, but if all of us didn't like it, I usually just don't tag them because I just don't, I don't want to rub it in their face. I don't want to make somebody feel bad about it. So
yeah,
that's a hard thing to do. I don't know. I would think that maybe some designers probably have thicker skin. Some designers probably like to hear that feedback and learn from it. But I don't know. I still feel bad about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny. I've seen a couple of kind of negative reviews, and the person will just put it out there and say like, hey, this is by this person, and then the company won't listen to it first, and they'll just retweet it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, ooh, like they're retweeting an honest review by somebody. So that's cool.
That's one of the things I appreciate. I had a chance to talk with Jamie Stegmeyer, but I followed him for a little while as well. I think for a lot of us, when we're getting into the hobby, the Stonemaier games, they stand out, the flashy games that are interesting themes. And so that was one of the first publishers that I started to follow. And one of the things I appreciate is his philosophy with reviewers is he publicly says he'll never listen to a review. So if a review comes in for one of his games, he won't listen to it and he will share it because one, he doesn't want to have that negative bias and feel like he doesn't want to send a review copy to that person before, but also he actually wants his audience. He wants the people that are playing his game to like the game. So if somebody's got a negative review, he wants people to hear that so that they can make up their mind about it. He's in a unique position, I think, because he's got a big following. He's going to sell games probably regardless of how they review. And I think there are smaller publishers or designers that aren't going to get that opportunity. They get a bad review from a big reviewer and they may never sell a game. So I think it's probably a different perspective there, but I appreciate the perspective anyway. It definitely makes me feel better as somebody who's starting to review games about being honest and not having to worry about that relationship.
Yeah. Well, us listeners really appreciate it because we know we can trust you. We know we can, it's not like you're saying, buy this.
Yeah.
You're just giving your impressions and I love it.
Yeah. I think part of what that comes from as well is that I am personally not naturally hyped. I'm kind of a minimalist. I love board games and I would be playing them all the time if I could, but I'm pretty hesitant to buy something if it's not going to get played, and it'll usually leave my collection right away. So, I think Chris a little less so. He's a little newer to the hobby, so he still is kind of in the hype machine and doesn't mind just like picking everything up. But for me, I really don't think that people should be going out and backing everything on Kickstarter. I mean, it's great if people can make their choices. Obviously, I think a lot of people would benefit from like pausing for a second and thinking about whether that's actually valuable. Personally, I think the whole Kickstarter, there's a value for Kickstarter to get some small games ever made or published, but for consumers, I think Kickstarter is a terrible idea. The consumer has to put up the money for it. They don't know when they're going to get their game, if ever, in some cases. And most of the time, you don't actually know what you're getting. You haven't heard valid reviews before it's come out. You haven't heard other players to know what it's like. So my perspective at this point on Kickstarter is like, if it's a reprint of a game that's already well reviewed, I'm interested. If it's a new game, unless it's just a project I really want to support, then I have zero interest in doing it. And I think a lot of people would benefit from just holding off until it comes out to retail because you can wait. You probably have 50 other games on your shelf right now that haven't been played. So yeah, definitely not part of the hype train if I can help it.
I'm envious because I have that FOMO so much.
It's hard, right? Because you see a game that looks really cool and everybody's talking about it, and you can only get that exclusive thing when it comes out. And for me, it's components. Like I don't want to miss out if it's a game I ultimately end up getting. If it's got an upgraded component, I want that. I like having the high quality components. But a lot of this stuff that comes in Kickstarters that you're afraid of missing out on is going to be like expansions and contents. And I kind of took a stock of all the Kickstarters I had backed and the Kickstarters that I knew my friends had backed, and we've never touched any of that extra content because we're playing too many games. So, you explore the base game enough, and then you just, almost never get to anything outside of that. So a FOMO is definitely a thing, but I still don't think it's good for the consumers.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I wish it were different. Well, let's talk about your group, the board game the hot takers, as I started calling you guys.
I like that. I've been trying to figure out how we should refer to ourselves, and you mentioned that on Twitter yesterday. I like that. That's good. That's our new name.
I'm sure there's something better out there.
Well, the name itself is kind of clunky, so we didn't make it easy to create a nickname on it. But that's life. We just a little side note. We came up with that name. It was kind of like I mentioned in the origin story episode that essentially Adam just threw out an idea and said, "Tim, let's do a podcast." And so I put together my thoughts on what it would be, and just brainstormed a name. And I said, hey, we'll just do our immediate thoughts. Let's call it something like Board Game Hot Takes. And then we recorded so quickly, and I just wanted to kind of put together an intro. So I used that name in our test episode, but then we liked it. So we published it. And so we just kept the name. So it was never really intended to be, I think we could have come up with something more clever, interesting. We've even talked about kind of rebranding at some point, but I don't know. It works. It is hard to. I was hoping to have something we could call our community members, though, and hot takers. I don't know. Doesn't flow off the tongue that great.
No, it doesn't. That's really awesome, though. I mean, I obsessed over my name for a while, and I still came up with something super clunky. So it does not fit on most things. When I very first started following you guys on Twitter, I thought that it was going to be like hot takes. Like there's kind of two meanings between hot takes of like instantaneous right after or, immediately. Or the other one is like, this is a very hot
controversial.
Take. Controversial. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I expected it to be controversial. But then when I started listening to the show, which I actually... Yeah, when I started listening to the show, I was a little relieved because I was like, oh, this is really cool. This is better than I expected. No offense.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of the problem with the brand. It's one of the reasons why we haven't loved it is because we don't want to necessarily give that impression. I mean, if you listen to our Marvel United review, then you'll know that we do have hot takes sometimes. But
what are you talking about? It's great.
But I've never intended it to be a controversial or even to incite controversy. I think I kind of incorrectly used the name when I brainstormed it. And again, it just stuck. And in fact, I got feedback. Kellen from Board Game Barrage, was nice enough when we first started putting out the episodes. He listened to one of our episodes and gave me feedback on it. And that was one of the things he said. He's like, I really expected a different, kind of the format from the name. Like I expected more, controversy. And instead it's a little bit more scholastic. You're just kind of going through, this formula that works well, but I don't think the brand fits. I was like, you're absolutely right. But, I've already paid for a domain name. I paid for a logo creation. Like I'm not ready to change it yet. Maybe that'll come. So definitely that's not what we intended. And in fact, we're generally pretty calm. We're a pretty chill group of people. And if anything, I would say we all lean, on the left politically and socially. And, I think, unfortunately, when you see our name, I think some people probably assume it's going to be us kicking up dust and saying things that are controversial. I don't think you're going to get too much controversy from us. So it's bad branding.
No, I like it. It caught my interest. I think it catches a lot of people's interest. Like, what are these people saying?
Yeah.
And I actually was wondering, I was like, you guys talked about climate control in one of your more recent episodes because of the Kickstarter that just launched the day we're recording this.
That's right. Yep. Earth Rising. Yep.
Earth Rising. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, they're probably left leaning. And then in Rap Gods, you talked about guns and how you don't like them in your game. And I was like, okay, well, definitely left. Like, okay, now I know their political stance.
Yeah, and we did that kind of intentionally. In fact, there's another episode you probably haven't gotten to yet. I can't remember which episode it's on, but we actually dedicate the whole second section to making sure, basically talking about minorities in design and trying to highlight female designers, LGBT designers, minority designers. That's important to us. And the Rap Gods episode is one of many that comes out of that in a very intentional, Chris picked that game because he wanted a minority game featured. Now we're cautious about it because we don't want to play games and then trash games from minority designers, right? That's definitely not our intent. But that was a game that was interesting enough. We all wanted to try it. And luckily we all really loved it. But you'll hear, especially in the second section of our show, oftentimes we'll try to highlight games by minority designers, or as women designers. Chris happened to highlight, I think it was in the Windward episode where he highlighted that he was looking for a indigenous designer. And so he found and bought a game that I'm excited to hear how it is for him. So yeah, I think if and that's intentional. And we post about it on Twitter and stuff. I'm fine with people listening if they have their own opinions, but I don't want to build a community that is are not people I would want to spend time with, and there's certain values that I just don't really want to be around. So I'm happy to put that out publicly. Hopefully, the rest of my crew is okay with me saying all this stuff, but that's my feeling.
They're like, no.
Luckily, we all do. Our whole group does. Have pretty similar leanings, pretty similar opinions. And so we can all relate in that way. We all feel good about being in each other's company and our values and our ethics and things like that. So that's at least it's good with our group to be in that situation.
I want to jump on the indigenous thing real quick. I'm part Native American. I don't look it. I'm super white. I'm always looking for, Native American designers or even just players. I don't see a lot on Twitter or out there very often. So if any listeners know of either players or designers, publishers, whatever, at me or let me know. And I'll go follow them on Twitter because I really want to fill my feed with that. It's something that's important to me.
One thing really quickly, one of the things that Chris did for his research, and I wouldn't call this research necessarily because it was kind of done for him, but Eric Lang put out a post. Eric Lang, the designer, right? We follow him on Twitter, but he put out a post a couple months back where he specifically said, "Hey, I want to highlight some indigenous designers. So, let me know." And so that's where Chris found about that game that he featured. So you can find, there weren't a whole lot, but you can find some others out there. But in my opinion, I think that's why representation matters. There's probably not a lot of indigenous players or designers because they're not being represented, right? I mean, it's just a community that just isn't part of this world. I think it's been traditionally a problem with women. It's getting better, but that's why something like 3% of our board game designers are women, or at least the ones that are popular and selling games. And it's just because there's a lot fewer out there. They haven't been, welcomed into the hobby in the past. So I'm glad to see that that's improving, but that's one of the reasons why we think representation of all kinds of, minority groups is important.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. Well, let's talk about each of your roles in the podcast. You all have almost a specialty. So like what you bring to the table and what type of games you lean towards.
Yeah. And this wasn't really, it's kind of funny because when we started the podcast, I'd only known Adam for probably 5 to 6 months. But pretty much as soon as we met, we started playing together once or twice a week, first right before the pandemic in person. And then, as soon as everything shut down, we went to online playing. But when we started the podcast, I didn't know him that well. So I'm still, or have been still learning his own tastes. Chris is newer into the hobby. As he mentioned, I introduced him. And so most of the games he'd played in the past were games that I brought over. And that had just started to shift shortly before the pandemic too, where he was starting to kind of build his own collection and, identify what he liked in games and what he didn't. So this podcast has actually been a great way for us to learn, what we like, who likes what. Now, there are some clear delineators after doing this for a year. I'm definitely the Euro game guy. I like puzzles. I like low conflict games. I like thematic Euros, so I prefer, Euros that are set in sci-fi worlds or set in fantasy worlds or things like that, rather than your dry, Feldian based on a European city worlds. But I'm definitely the Euro guy. So when we're picking, what we do to pick our games every week is we kind of rotate. One of us will pick the game, and then, it'll go around in a circle. So you get a nice variety of the types of games. But if there's a Euro game on the list, on the podcast, it was probably my choice. Chris, on the other hand, he just loves production. He loves big minis. He loves, monsters. So if it's a game with big production, area control and kind of like troops on a map games are one of the things that he likes a lot. So when we play Cthulhu Wars or Blood Rage, those are Chris's choices. That's his type of thing. And then Adam's weird. He's just got quirky tastes. I think, he likes a bit of both. He definitely leans towards the conflict side. He likes games where there's a lot of like, I can go after Tim and I can, beat up on him. So, and they do that. They always gang up on me. But that's, he's got a weird mix. Like if you listen to his top 10 is one of the quirkiest top 10 lists I've ever heard. Some of the games that I absolutely love and some of the games that I don't like at all. So yeah, he's a little harder for me to pin down. I think he's always just discovering and, figuring stuff out too. So
it makes sense. When you're new to the hobby, you think you know what you like, and then you'll try something you don't think you would like, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe I like this type of game.
Yeah.
Like you guys did, there were 2 episodes, Obsession, which was a game that I've heard really good things about, but it's a theme that didn't catch me. And you talked about how that was a theme that you really liked.
Yep. Yeah, that's a funny one. I love Jane Austen. I grew up like reading and loving movies, set in that time period. And so this was a perfect theme for me. So yeah, I know. And that was a hard one. Chris was pushing back on it. Adam was laughing at me about it for months. And I finally, I was like, whatever, I'm just going to bring it to the table. We're going to play it. And they all got into it. It was great. Yeah,
I was really surprised, after listening to a few episodes and getting a taste for what everyone kind of liked, when everyone was like into that game, I thought, okay, well, all right. I like, even from you guys' description and your takes on it, I was like, shoot, I really want to play this game now. That was when I had I respected people who liked it, but had no interest in playing it. And now I'm like, I gotta play this.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, you probably caught it a little bit. Like I liked the game, but I would even say that I was a little disappointed by the gameplay. Not greatly. Yeah. It's a good game, but it didn't do everything right for me. But the theme still makes me want to, play it more. But yeah, I mean, Chris loved it. He didn't like the theme at all, and he just had a blast playing it. I think he was the hottest on it. So it's really funny how games connect sometimes.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And then, I mean, there's games that are outside of your wheelhouse that you really liked. Like Blood Rage was a surprise for you.
Yeah, Blood Rage was great. Another one that I had no interest in the theme and not much interest in the gameplay, and that was Smartphone Inc., which we just reviewed a couple months back. And that was a huge hit for me too. I absolutely loved it. That's the thing. That's why I think it's fun too that we don't have just one person picking the game. So I get a chance to play a bunch of games that I might not have chosen, but sometimes I love them. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I can read the rule book and be like, I don't think this is a game for me. Windward was a great example of that. I was happy to go in and play it for Chris's sake, but I hadn't heard much about it. And I read the rules and I was like, I don't think I'm going to have much fun playing this. And I was right in that case. But sometimes you get surprised. Rap Gods surprised me, actually. Rap Gods was a game that I wanted to support the project and the designer, but I read the rules and I really didn't think that was going to be a fun game, and it was a blast. So it's always fun to find those things, those jewels.
I thought that was interesting too, because that was another one where I had a minor interest in because I had play tested one of his games that he's working on now.
Okay,
and with him, and he was really cool. But actually, I didn't get to finish play testing it. We didn't get too far into it because there was a problem on Tabletop Simulator. Anyways, okay. It happens, especially with prototypes. And so I was really curious to go back and try some of his older stuff. So hearing that review was like, oh, cool. Like, and also made me really bummed that I didn't get to fully test out his new game he's working on. But anyways, I ramble. I should have asked this before. How did you meet all of your co-hosts?
Yeah. So one, we go a little bit into this on our 1 year anniversary episode. So if you're listening and you're interested to know more about us, you're probably not, but if you are, that's a good place to find it. But Steve, who is an occasional co-host with us, he's my brother. Obviously, I grew up playing games with him. He introduced me to a lot of the hobby. I really got into, I would say, this hobby adjacent with Magic the Gathering. That was like a lifestyle game for me for about 20 years. He introduced me to it. But he also, over the years, have been introducing me to other hobby board games. And so when I really started to get into this hobby, he was an easy fit. So when he lives across he lives in Portland, I live in Phoenix now. But when we, twice a year or so, we'll fly one or the other. We'll fly over and spend a weekend together. And mostly all we do is play games, and it's awesome. And, we always have a great time doing it. Jen is the one that I knew the second most. When I moved to California about 11 years ago, she, my wife and I were just new there, trying to meet some new couples. And so my wife found a meetup group that's for, just social couples, to get to know each other. And Jen had actually put that group together. And so we got there, we met her and her husband at the time, as well as a couple other people. And then the group basically disbanded right away because, she's like, I put this group together to meet people, and I met some people I really like. So I don't need to keep doing this group. But she's been friends ever since. And, she went through a divorce a few years ago. So, she's got 3 kids, and they're about my daughter's age. So it's just a great, it's been a great fit to kind of help her, move on. And we've had she was our like quarantine friend. So, for the last year and a half, and we really weren't doing anything social at all. She was in our pod, so her and her kids would come over, and we had always, when we used to hang out, we'd play, simple card games, Yahtzee, things like that. And I introduced her to Castles of Burgundy a few years ago when we were vacationing together, and it took a couple plays for it to click. And now she'll tell you that it's the best game of all time. She loves it. But now that's like our thing. Almost every weekend, she's like, hey, what are you guys doing Saturday? Let's get together and play some games. So she's an awesome gaming buddy as well. Adam, I met, like I said, just about a few months before the pandemic started, and I met him at a local gaming group. Like, Chris couldn't get together one day to game. He was my local gamer. My wife was like, hey, I think there's a thing going on at my church. She was going to the UU church in Long Beach, California. And she's like, they have a gaming day on Saturdays. Why don't you go over there? So I went over there, met Adam while we were just waiting for a game to get started. And I was like, wow, this guy seems like a normal guy. So I invited him to my local. I was putting on a regular like weekly game night, and he showed up at the next one, and we just hit it off. So that's been awesome. And then Chris, I met several years before that, after we moved to Long Beach, California, and just hit it off with his family. And I kind of dragged him into the hobby. Like one day, I was just like, hey man, you feel like playing some board games with me? Our wives are doing something else. He's like, sure, why not? So he had no interest at all. He was just, he was game to give it a try. And I think for a few games, he just kind of went along with it. But then he started to actually find things that he was passionate about. I remember I had just gotten Scythe. This was back in like 2017, and brought it out for game night. And Chris wouldn't stop talking about it for like a week because, it had the minis, it had the theme going on, it had a cool theme that he was excited about. And I think was probably the game that really got him to be like, wow, I actually am excited about this hobby and what could come out of it. So yeah, so that's where kind of all over the place.
I'm envious. I want like board game friends.
Yeah, Riley, you can be my board game friend.
Yeah, thanks.
It's been hard because we moved to the Scottsdale, Phoenix area, last October. So right in the middle of the pandemic, and there, again, we were being pretty cautious. We have a lot of younger kids, and don't want to be involved in spreading this disease and stuff. So until the adults were vaccinated in our group, we weren't doing anything outside of the house. So moved here and really didn't get a chance to meet anybody for months. But it's starting to open up a little bit. We're still being cautious, but I've gone to a couple local gaming groups here and started to meet some people that I like playing with, that I like talking to. So my hope is to eventually have another like weekly in-person game night with 6 to 8 people, like I used to do in Long Beach. I love that. That's like my favorite, time of the week. Monday nights have filled in for that, and it's great. I love hanging out with these guys every Monday night and doing the podcast with them and playing a game with them. But oh man, am I tired of playing games online, like Tabletop Simulator. It is not the same experience as playing in person. There's always somebody's internet goes out halfway through. There's always like, interface issues with dragging the pieces around. There's, you try to use these scripted versions of games and half the time the script sets something up wrong. So you just played a 2-hour game and you realize at the end that it wasn't even set up correctly. So I'm pretty tired of that stuff. Looking forward to more in-person gaming for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That's exciting though. I mean, it's nice you have a group, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And you'll never stop playing TTS or online games because you have a podcast around it at this point.
I know. I think that's accurate. And I think that's probably good too, because it does, it'll allow us to all stay connected. This group of friends that I've made over time, and my brother even, I talk to and hang out with my brother more now because of the podcast and because of our weekly game night than I have for years, because him and I have not lived close together for like 12 years. So, that's been awesome. It's been fun to spend time with him, but also these other friends that I've made. I'm glad that we've got a connection. It can be frustrating sometimes, playing online or, like having that be the way that you are interacting with people, but we still have a great time. We played Eclipse Second Dawn for the Galaxy last night before we recorded our podcast, and just like, it was awesome. Laughed all the way through it, and trash talked, and so yeah, it's fun to do even with some of the struggles with it.
Yeah. Every time I'm listening, I'm just like, these are guys I would love to game with sometime. And Scott or Mesa, I was born in Mesa, and so I still have like family there. Which is that's only like 30 minutes from Scottsdale.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, for sure. So. Well, if you're ever here visiting family, Riley, we got to get together. We'll do game day.
I'll hit you up. I was up in Portland, but I don't know Adam or Steve, so
it's Chris and Steve. Chris and Steve.
Chris and
Portland.
Steve. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm still in Long Beach.
Okay, yeah,
that's right.
I knew that. I listened to the episode. Yeah,
it's a lot to keep track of. I get it.
Yeah, I'm just happy that now I can identify your voices and your names, because there's Adam, Chris, Steve, Jen. Tim. I know Tim, of course.
Yeah, we for the first time too. I think one of the things we probably should have been doing more is kind of putting a face to our name, with the podcast. I think it's easier for people to connect. So because of the anniversary episode, and it was kind of our origin story, I finally just, and they're not good because I'm not a good photo editor, but I just took screen grabs from our video, from our recording, and then, edited them a little bit and posted them up on our Twitter feed. So if you want to see what we all look like, it's up there now on Twitter.
Let's get to a little bit of meat here, a little controversy, some hot takes here. Marvel United. We have to talk about it because it's one of my favorite games.
That's great, Riley. So tell me, what do you love about Marvel United?
I love, Reckoners. Have you played Reckoners?
I haven't. No, I'm aware of the game. I know all about it, but I haven't played it.
So that was my favorite game for a while, but then this took that place because I like that there's a set number of cards you can use in this. You guys have some very valid points, but I feel like a little knowledge helps, where like every character has a different amount of movement, attacks, heroics, and wilds. Every character has like a wild and a double wild. And so I take those out completely because that's playing on the heroic mode. And it makes every character like really, really feel different, because like Hulk can move around a lot and smash. He doesn't do like a lot of heroics. And so like you have to actually kind of plan out your team. I wish they did a better job of like telling you who is better at what.
Yeah.
So that you could like actually strategize that. But
that's, I probably didn't catch that with my one play, and Chris played a few times. But it's not really just that their decks are a little bit asymmetric. I think that was a turnoff to us. To me, it was that there is not too much interesting going on with the cards, regardless of what it is. It's always one of three icons, right? I think it's three icons, and it might be two of one or one of two different kinds, or just a single icon. And when I compare that to other games of a similar kind of learning weight that are card based. Let's take a game like Star Realms, for example. Very easy deck builder. It has three basic icons that you're usually using, but probably 40% of the cards in the deck also have some other text on them. So it might say, do 3 damage, but then also draw another card. And just by adding a little bit extra, that really it's written right on the card, so it doesn't take extra rules head or anything like that. It gives you so much more variety in what the cards do, and how interesting they are when they come up and how they interact with each other. And that's where, for me, again, with one gameplay, that Marvel United didn't get me too excited. It felt like every time I was looking at a hand of 3 things to do, and I know you can put them together in a certain order. But all that said, first of all, I think it's good to note that I am not a big co-op player.
That's
like
true.
Co-op games in general, I'm just not a huge fan of. And I think there are some fun ones, and I think they're fine. I still enjoy playing a game of Pandemic, or I played Lost Forbidden Island with the Organized Fun guys. I still had a fun time doing it, but they don't get me too excited. So when we were playing that game at Chris's choice, because he went all in on this Kickstarter and he really wanted to try it with me, I had a fine time playing the game. Chris didn't. And a lot of what I was trying to say on the podcast was about Chris's expectations and how let down he was. Like, the game didn't wow me. I wouldn't necessarily choose to go back to it, but I didn't hate it. I was sitting there trying to work out the puzzle with him and got through it. And if he wanted to jump in and play another game, I would have been happy to do it. But it was more just about it's the Kickstarter thing. I think that's one of the things that really turned me off. This one more than most, where, people would go in $300 on a game. That's great. Riley, you love the game. I'm so glad if people are having fun with it and loving exploring it and things like that. But, at least from Chris's perspective, he felt like it was a huge letdown, a huge disappointment. And I was trying to speak to that a little bit. So, again, that was me probably not articulating very well. I wasn't that negative on the review. It was more just, you just killed somebody for $300 on a game that they didn't enjoy at all. If he'd picked that up for $40 at a store, I think it's totally worth the experience. And you got to try a game, you didn't love it, that's okay. But it's different when you go all in on something you never got a chance to play or never heard a reviewer do. So it was probably as much about the way the campaign was run as it was the game itself.
Well, I definitely agree. I had a problem. I almost didn't back it. I mean, I was like minute 1 backing it, because I was hyped up about it. And I almost pulled out because I kept waiting for them to release like a gameplay video. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, they're not releasing it because it's going to be boring. Like, there's no way around this. It's not going to be a good game, and that was my thought for a long time. And even like weeks until I got it, I had the same thought. Like, I was just like, you know what, I want to get into painting miniatures anyway. So, and I love Marvel. So at the very least, I'll have these miniatures to paint. And then when I got it, I was very pleasantly surprised, especially like playing through different villains and how different they all feel and how thematic they feel. But I totally get not getting into it. I wish it was actually way deeper. I wish it was something more like Cthulhu May Die or, like almost any other Eric Lane game.
Yeah.
But I think this bums me out to say, because Marvel Champions is also one of my favorite games.
Okay.
But I am refusing to play, what's the Arkham one?
The Arkham card game, Arkham Horror card game.
There we go. Yeah.
Game or something like that.
Yeah. I don't know why I spaced one word of that. It's like the same type of game, but the Arkham Horror one is way deeper.
Yeah.
And has a lot more to it. And I know that. And I don't want to play it because then I'll feel like my Marvel Champions is like a very hollow experience.
Yeah. You have a loyalty to that game. I think it's a hard thing. I think you invest so much, and I've got an example of this, but you invest so much when you go through a Kickstarter and you get excited about it and you're waiting for it for a long time, and then it comes and you pull it out and it's like beautiful and you want to love it. And I think that's another struggle that I have as a reviewer, of getting too excited about a game and then not, and then I think it's easy to kind of put more positive feelings on something because you want to love it. It's hard to do. It's hard to get something you're really excited about and then feel like these things we put these value on things that we don't need to. They don't have feelings. They're not going to feel bad if you don't like this one.
Yeah. No, exactly. And everyone has different tastes. That's just because you hate something doesn't mean somebody else is going to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And likely the awesome thing about board games, right, is like with the organized fun episode that I was in, they were not great games for us. We did not enjoy them very much, but we had an absolute blast playing them because we were playing them together. Like,
Right.
that's what board games are about. Hanging out.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that, absolutely. And the good news is that if you play a game that you don't like, somebody else will probably like it. Move it on, and also don't feel bad for the game, because there are plenty of other people that love that game, even if it wasn't perfect for you.
Which again ties back to if you haven't listened to Board Game Hot Takes, go listen, of course. I think the anniversary episode would be a good one to jump in on, because then you can kind of get to know the hosts, and yeah, I think it's just a fun way to get to know you. And then the other episodes follow a certain format that's really cool. I don't drink, but I love the newer segment of is it Chris?
Chris, yeah.
Chris pairs drinks with games, and I'm just like, I have no interest in drinking, but but I do want to make virgin versions of all these yummy drinks.
Yeah, I love that segment so much because Chris really puts a lot into it. I don't know if you can tell that when he's speaking to it, but he's written out a whole script on that, and basically he's done research on the history of the drink and how it ties into the episode and everything. And I honestly think it's probably the from a, I don't know, I hate to even use the word journalism, but from an actual, like, having a journalistic value like that, that's the one segment of the show that's actually well researched and like has some experience behind it. Yeah, Chris is an amateur mixologist, and before board games, that was one of his other bigger hobbies. And so he knows these drinks really well. He knows the history of them. He follows, just like we do board games, he follows like podcasts and chat groups and stuff like that about cocktails. So it's really fun to have him bring that passion in. And we've always enjoyed when I play games with him, he would just, in person, he would always make like a themed cocktail, and we all love it. It's just so much fun. So it's great that he's sharing that with the audience as well. I'm sure there are other listeners as well that just don't have any interest in drinking. But hey, if you don't like that, we do timestamp the shows. Just skip by it if it's not interesting to you. On the other hand, I do think it's probably the most entertaining part of the show, so it's worth a listen, even if you don't plan to make the drinks.
I wouldn't go that far, but I mean, like, I'm sure that I can make virgin versions. I love drinking drinks. I love yummy drinks, and like I think the Windward is one of the best examples of this, because he started talking about like pirates and what they did, or like ship on the Navy.
It was Navy. Yeah, it was Navy. Cruise,
that's
right?
What it was. I was going to say, yeah. And so like going into that history of it, and then like tying it to other things, and I was just like, what in the world? This is wild. Like, this is so well researched. It's fun learning about this random thing about why this pairs well with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
That actually brings me to, you talked about how scripted that is. Are there other parts that are scripted, like you do the introduction to the game? Is that pretty scripted?
So, basically what I used to script more of it. So I wrote the introduction, and for a while was just reading that off a script and have other people, whoever is reading it does that. But now we've done it so many times that we just kind of wing through the introduction. But the game introductions, we do still write and record. And oftentimes, although we try to, kind of write it and record it at the same time as the podcast, in other words, have it there and ready to read as the podcast is going. What I found lately is that I hate putting that together before I've played the game. So unless it's a game I already know well and have played, if this is our first time playing it, what I've been doing lately is actually we go through the game night, do the podcast recording, and then the next day I write the game description. And then, kind of we split, we add it in, I record it and add it in. I don't know how that works, to be honest. When we first started the show, if you go back and listen to like our first couple episodes, the description was short, like, this is a tile laying game with a card tableau, and then, published by this publisher. So we didn't go very much into detail, but I got some early feedback that really just wasn't that helpful. People, we're sitting there talking about a game for an hour and they don't know how the game plays or really what the mechanisms are. I started to flesh that out a little bit. And now I don't know, we may have gone over the top. I feel like I'm basically like giving a full rules introduction on the last couple episodes. So if anyone has feedback for me, I'd love to know whether that's working or whether it's not. But yeah, that part is all scripted. I am not good at improvising at all, and something like that. There's an episode where I did just a kind of a quick, at the end of the episode, oftentimes we talk about games that we're excited about or games that we've been playing. And I had just bought Fox in the Forest and played a couple times with my daughter. So I wanted to talk about it on the show. And it was terrible. Fox in the Forest has like 3 rules. It's the easiest game in the world to explain. And I couldn't remember the scoring mechanism. So it took me like 5 minutes stumbling through this description. And Adam actually even spliced in like an editor's note saying like, this is about the funniest and worst description you'll ever hear. Have fun with it. So he gave that warning because it was so bad. So no, you believe me, it's a good thing that we script the rules description and the game description.
Oh, absolutely. And I actually really like it, the how detailed it goes, because like with Obsession, that was super helpful, where like I've kind of heard a little bit about the game, but I didn't really have an understanding of it. Other ones, you don't spend all that much time on them because there's not that much to explain. Then when you're talking about your hot takes, it like really helps to tie that together. So I could see how being simple, just being like, oh, you play a couple rounds and you play cards and that's it, like something short, or, whatever it was. If this is, some of them might work for that, but a lot of like Euro or deeper mechanics.
I feel like the funny thing is that's my least favorite part of making the podcast as well, is having to write the game description, because it's actually really hard to try to succinctly take everything that's in the rules in a clear enough way without visuals to try to explain to people how the game plays. And so it's something that, I don't spend a ton of time on it. I can usually knock one out in about 15 to 30 minutes to write that out, and then I record it. But it's never something, it's like a chore. It's not something I enjoy doing. The rest of the podcast is all fun for me, but that part of it is always like, I got to get the game description done.
Yeah.
Hey. So I hope it's helpful. I hope people are liking it, because it's a job.
It's definitely helpful. You're talking to the king of not prepping for stuff. I have 3 questions for you. That's the entire hour. So what about when you finish the game? How soon after you finish the game do you actually record? Do you take time to like make notes on what your thoughts were or anything, or do you?
No, not at all. So we basically, we're usually on like Google Chat while we're playing. So I'll have my iPad up with Google Chat so I can see everyone's faces while my computer screen has Tabletop Simulator on it, and we'll finish the game. And I'd be like, all right, guys, let's jump over to Riverside. Riverside is our podcast recording platform. So everyone just hangs up from Google Chat. We jump over into Riverside, and we might do a quick sound check, because sometimes if we don't, we realize we got a mic problem or something like that. So we'll do a quick sound check, or just make sure it looks like everyone's connected and we can hear them. And then we just press record, and I jump right into the thing. So we don't really, it is truly immediately after. A lot of that comes from just us, wanting to finish. Like we start game night at like 7:00 because everyone's had dinner with their families and things like that. And I think we're a slower group, and playing on Tabletop Simulator doesn't help. But if you read the time on a game, like how long it's supposed to play, you can pretty much count on us playing twice as long on almost any game. And we're playing some heavier games. Like we played Eclipse last night. That was a 3-hour game. And then we recorded a podcast afterwards. So a lot of it is just about like, okay, we're already tired. It's 10:30. Let's just get in and record the podcast. So we rush right into it.
That makes a lot of sense. And bravo on the commitment, because that's got to be exhausting. It doesn't come across
so fun,
either.
It's so fun. Once we start talking about games, it's just like, I swear, even if we weren't recording, I'm just happy that I've kind of found a way to force my friends to sit and chat about games with me. Because when I used to do game nights, that's what I always wanted to just like rehash and kind of break down the game and talk about exciting moments and like all this stuff that we do now. But we'd finish a game and people are like, no, I got to get going. I'm going to get home. So now I've got them trapped. It works great.
That's genius. That's what I always applaud. I know we've talked about Phil and Mark from Organized Fun, but I just applaud how genius that idea was for him to be like, hey, if I make a podcast about board games, then he's got to play board games with me every week, right. So bravo to both of you. Why did I not do this? We covered a couple of things actually in other segments, so that makes it easier. But we did not cover this, which is normally a first question. What's your favorite game?
We recently did a top 10 list of board games of all time. And the number one on that list for me at that time was Anachrony. And I mentioned that as well last week in our anniversary show. We talked about our favorite games. I don't know if that's going to stick. I really love that game. It's a wonderful puzzle. It's good solo. It's good multiplayer. It just does everything that I like in a Euro, which, I like the kind of action selection mechanism of worker placement. And this one just adds layers upon layers to it. Fun decisions. It's tight, competitive. It's got, engine building. It's got a great theme on it. So right now, that's the game that if I had my choice and unlimited time to sit down and play with three, close friends, that's the game that I would choose. So I'm saying that now. That being said, I think it's a little on the heavy side, probably to stick there for very long, because I don't think it's a game that I'm going to get played as often as I want to. And so, those things tend to fall out when you're just not playing something as much. It kind of falls off the radar a little bit. So right now, that's my favorite game, but that could definitely shift.
Nice. I already knew that, but that's just because I listened to the episode. You talk about it in it. Well, it's stuck around for a little bit because it's in the top 10 and in this anniversary.
Yeah, in fact, we did a episode called Gaming Weekend Extravaganza, where Adam came out from Long Beach and my wife was out of town. So he came out and the two of us just played games all weekend long. And that was our introduction, because he had actually backed that Kickstarter, for the big box Anachrony with all the expansions, and decided he was going to sell it. And I'd always wanted to try it. So I was like, I'll buy it from you. Just bring it out when you come. And so we busted it out, punched it, learned it, and played it that weekend. And you can hear the joy, because we talk about 10 games, and that game by far was the one that I, that stuck with me. So pretty much since then, that weekend, it's the game that every time I think about what do I really want to be playing right now, that's the game. But even though I play a decent amount of solo games too, and that's a great solo game, I'm not even getting that out very much, because it's a bigger chore to set up, and I know I've got to spend a couple hours playing it, and so that's why I could see it falling off, even though I'm still in love with it. And I think I always will be. I think it's a great game, but I'm just not sure that. Like recently from solo gaming, Lost Ruins of Arnak, I don't want to take it off my table. I'm just playing it constantly. I can get that game done in 30 minutes. And so I would say that I could almost see that knocking Anachrony off the list. So I think that's going to be a changing list all the time. I'm just excited anytime I can play a new game that gets me that excited. If my top 10 shifts by next year and it's completely different games, that's a good thing. That means I've learned a whole bunch of new games.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many games coming out. So
yeah. We'll see if anyone gets any of them with the way that shipping is going and things like that. There could be a bit of a drought of the way that industry people are talking about it right now. I think there could be a drought of new games. So, hey, everyone, that's a great time to explore your shelf of shame and get some of those games sitting there played.
Yeah. I'm like, don't look behind me. None of these get played. They're just decoration. Actually, I just printed out somebody else's Calyx.
Calyx, yeah. There you go.
I don't know why I spaced on the name. Just printed it out, and it's just a poster behind me. Those aren't real.
Riley, I got a question for you that you should include, because you probably haven't been asked this question. What's your favorite game other than, well, I guess Organized Fun just asked you that, and you said that you were leaning towards Marvel United. So what's the good game that is your favorite game? Like, do you have a second pick?
You know what? Actually, well, it's hard. Near and Far.
I love Near and Far.
I could literally play that anytime. I absolutely love that game. There's times where I don't necessarily want to play Marvel United, and it might be that, I went all in on that, and so it's just invested money-wise that it's my favorite. But Near and Far is up there, and there's also a game called D6 that I almost never get to the table. Have you heard of this one?
Not Deep Space D6, is it?
No,
it's just D6. No, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's like Dungeons, Dragons, Dames, Dudes. I don't remember what the D6 is. It's essentially like you're just bounty hunting and fighting monsters. There's a co-op mode, but I think the versus is really fun because it kind of has this like Mad Lib style interruption. So you'll go to like attack a werewolf, and then you could play a card against somebody and be like, oh, you go to attack them, but your weapon turns into a floppy fish, like it'll be a blank and you just get to fill in the blank. And so there's kind of like some silliness happening, but also you're trying to stop them from getting more points than you. And then you could play a bonus card that like turns the werewolf into a glass vase, a fragile vase, and so now you have advantage on it or something like that. And so it's
Okay.
just like it's a really silly, fun game that for whatever reason I never get to play.
So with Near and Far, did you are you excited about Now or Never? Have you heard about Ryan Lockett's next game in the series?
Yeah, and I think a video a watch it played maybe just came out on it.
Okay. Okay.
Or something. There's some actual gameplay video, and that's what I've kind of been waiting on. What about you?
Yeah, I'm excited. I did pre-order that when it came out, just because I'm such a fan of Near and Far, and it looked like it's got some fun, Euro-y mechanisms to it. I like the story. I like the story mixed in there. I'm a Euro player, but I do like theme, and so like Near and Far is so much fun. Where you go and do this thing that is really just it's an optimization thing. I want to get this resource, but then there's a story around it, and the choice you make dictates the story. I love that. I think it's great flavor. I think Ryan Lockett does a good job with that.
Yeah, I think that's been my hesitancy with Now or Never, is that I haven't seen the story side of it. I don't understand. Is there a story with it?
Yeah, I think it's similar to Near and Far, where there's a book or cards or something, but basically similar thing. You go to a certain location and a story event happens, and so that it fits into the mechanism. So I think there's going to be some similarities there.
I should just go pre-order it so I can get those metal coins.
There you go. And FOMO.
Yeah, just because I've loved. I don't know if you can see I see all the Ryan Lockett games, but I love Ryan Lockett's games. They're so great, and he's a Utah designer. He's a local guy.
Okay, that's right. I think I knew that. That's right. Have you had a chance to meet Ryan Lockett?
No.
Okay.
We're in the same guild, I guess, but he hasn't come for years and years for board game designers.
Got it.
That's okay. Whatever. I don't care. I'm not bitter. No, he's really, really awesome though. Like one of my friends has met him, and I don't know how much I can say about that, but he said he's just super nice and super cool guy. He also helps sponsor some local events. Like we do ProtoCon, where it's an online or not online. We're doing an online one this week, but it'll be in the past from when this from when this airs. But he like how I got Rome is he donated that to ProtoCon in person, which happened just before the pandemic, like a month or two before the pandemic broke. And that was my introduction into gaming too, like a gaming community. Because before it was just me and my brother. So anyways, I ramble.
Very cool. Very cool.
Get me started about
Me too. Me too.
But actually that reminded me of a question I had for you. We always end the show with ridiculous theme. Mm-hmm. I mean, that all spawned from Euros because we think Euros, me and my friend Danny, we would always make fun of Euros and how themeless they are, how ridiculous their themes are, that it's like gaming, stained glass windows. And now you're talking about how there's better ones. There's space themed Euros. And I'm just like, I know they're out there. Share some with us.
Yeah. Okay. So some of my favorite themed Euros. So Gaia Project is a heavy Euro. It's got a space theme on it. Exploration does the same thing a lot of traditional Euros do. Just resource management, a little bit of engine building, but it's got a fun space theme on it. So that's an easy one. Anachrony, which I mentioned already, time travel. That's great. Dune Imperium is one of my favorite games of recent years. And, that of course has the Dune IP on it. It really tells a story with that deck building and the worker placement in there. Somehow those two dry Euros fit together and actually tell a story that escalates throughout the course of the game. Lost Ruins of Arnak is another one I just mentioned, which is a Indiana Jones type of theme on it. So yeah, those are some that have been on my mind lately, but that's, if you go back and listen to my top 10 list, it's like all themed Euros. Scythe is another example, one that I don't play as much anymore, but kind of that I would say was one of the big instigators for me to get really excited and into the hobby. And that's what it does. It looks like a troops on a map game, but it's really not. It's a Euro, optimization puzzle with cool mechs and a cool theme on it.
It's all like children's medicine where it's like, this is berry flavored. It's good. It's candy, Like that's what I feel like, because when you were naming those, I'm like, yes, like I really want to try all of those, and I don't ever see them as Euros in my mind because they have a
Yeah.
theme, and that's just
Yeah.
something I have to get over.
Yeah, well, I think the question is why are there so many Euros that don't have an interesting theme? Like there are some really wonderful games like Castle of Burgundy. I was just thinking the other day is a fantastic game, right? And almost any Stefan Feld game, he just did Bonfire, which actually has a fun fantasy theme on it, and I think he's done a couple others. But for the most part, they get published with just the name of a city on it. But let's make Castles of Burgundy a space exploration game. Like it all works. You're populating the surface of a planet. So, the buildings you build are types of buildings that are going to help you, sustain life. And the animals that you pick up are alien creatures that you're like, you could make that a super fun theme and that game would be 100 times better. It's already amazing, but it could be better. And that goes for dozens of other games that I'm interested in playing, but not that interested because, the theme just doesn't get me excited. That said, I'm a mechanisms first person, so I will probably, if I play one of those games, I'll love it. I'm just less likely to be drawn to it unless there's an interesting theme on it.
Yeah, I totally can relate to that because I always pretend like I don't like Euros, but I absolutely love them. I just don't like the themes. I just wish I could go to outer space.
Exactly.
Or fantasy or whatever. It's just, yeah. So that's good to hear. I feel like you're going to help me here. What kind of hobbies do you have outside of board games? Or what do you do beyond board games?
Yeah, so I have a 9-year-old daughter, so I do spend a lot of time with her. We live in Phoenix, Arizona, where it is hot all summer long. So we've been spending a lot of time in the pool together. But as far as personal hobbies, I try to work out every day. I try to get a run in or lift weights every day. And mostly I'm doing that while listening to board game podcasts. So in some sense, I'm actually still doing more of my hobby, but that's kind of my peaceful place. I've been, pretty active and staying active for 25 years. And I prefer not to miss a day if I can help it. So running and just lifting weights, that's, I guess it's a hobby. Maybe it's more of a chore. I don't know. Yeah,
that's on your attitude.
That's right. That seems to be like, you know what else I love? I spend a lot of time fixing up houses. Right now, we bought this house in October and it needed quite a bit of work. So I do a lot of that hands-on. I spend usually a good part of my weekend. This weekend I was replacing baseboard in my game room and I'll be replacing a vanity soon. So I do that type of stuff. I do own a vacation house that is kind of an investment property as well. And so when I can, I drive out there and I spend the weekend just fixing stuff up. And ultimately that's kind of my goal. I'd like to retire, semi-retire from my technology job a little early and just, do that, be more hands-on, fix up properties and that's what I like doing it. So for something that you can make some money at and it's kind of a job, but it's actually fun to me, which I can't say that about my regular job for the most part. So
it pays the bills at this point, right?
That's right. I used to be really into cinema, like classic cinema as well. I was like every top 100 list of movies, I made an effort to pursue them and watch them. And that was awesome. That was a super fun experience. And once I kind of made it through those lists, I felt like that was the cream of the crop and everything just started to go downhill from there. So I've kind of gotten out of that hobby. Mostly the movies I care about watching now are like Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. Like I love big, superhero blockbuster movies, which is completely opposite of the, top 100 critically acclaimed movies of all time. So
what are you talking about? They're amazing.
I think, I agree with you. I think they are amazing, but other people might disagree with me.
It's true. Now, spoiler, this was recorded after Ridiculous Theme, but we've been watching a lot of HGTV and I like doing housework and renovating some stuff. And so that could be a ridiculous theme too. Yeah,
that for sure could. I think there's been some home renovation and blueprint, home building type of games, but I think there's some fun to be mined there for sure. I think you could make some fun stuff out of it.
Yeah, that's been on my mind actually a lot because when we went to Portland a couple weeks ago, anytime we were in the hotel, HGTV was on because we don't have it here at home, and so it was just really, really fun to watch that. And then my mind started going what if you start with a random crappy house, like rundown house, and you have to like renovate it, and you just compete to see who can renovate for the highest profit.
I love it. That's a great idea, especially because every home renovation project is a little bit different. So you got asymmetric houses. The value of the different types of materials you need, depending on the projects your house needs, will vary. Right, every game would be kind of a random market. Sometimes some are going to be more valuable than others. You got to compete over contractors. And, like hiring them at the right time so they don't slow down your project. Oh, God. Yeah, that's a Lacerda game in the works right there.
There you go. Bam. Ridiculous. That's the golden ridiculous theme right there.
Perfect. Throw out the 2016 election and put in the house building one. That's perfect.
And we're having some anachrony right here where this is going to go in before that stuff. Oops. So look forward to that. All right. Now I'll cut back into the wherever it goes, probably at the introduction of ridiculous theme.
Sounds good.
You've already given us a ridiculous theme idea with the castles of Burgundy in space, essentially. But do you want to come up with another one? Ridiculous theme where we just come up with a ridiculous theme for a board game.
Okay, so I have two. Neither of these, which are probably going to be very interesting to anybody else. But one of my other hobbies is I'm a runner. I haven't been running as much lately because I've got a foot injury, so I can only do a couple miles at a time. But I used to love doing half marathons, and I've done a few marathons as well. But the whole experience of going through and training and working your body up to get to do to 10 to 20 miles, the time spent with friends, if you've got a running group that you run with and you're out there for 10 miles just talking about life for all that time. Or I spent a lot of time listening to podcasts or listening to music while training for these. So I have a lot of great memories of training for running, a lot of great memories of running these big races, locations all over the world. I've done Mexico City and Death Valley, and it's just the whole lifestyle there I love. But there is not, as far as I know, any games about running a marathon, and I feel like it could be done. I'm worried. I just got a chance to play Flamme Rouge the other day, which is about bicycle racing. It was a fun enough game, but the mechanisms of it were just a tad dry. I don't think it's something I'd want to go back to too often. So I'd be worried about a game about running a marathon, which is a slow plodding, 4-hour exercise would probably also end up dry. But I feel like there's a way to make that fun, like a deck building mechanism, and the stuff you pick up are the things that you might happen on the course. I don't know. I'm sure there's a game that could be made out of. Somebody will probably do one, but to me, that's a theme that hasn't been explored. It's not that wacky, but it's a theme that I'd be interested to see for sure.
I could totally see that. As you mentioned deck building, and I think of it's definitely an endurance thing. Yeah. So you've got to build your deck, and I almost feel like you'd get exhaustion every time you cycle through your deck or something, or you could push yourself, but that would exhaust you more. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very similar actually to what Flamme Rouge does, which is it's a deck builder where you start with 2 decks of cards for each of your cyclists. And then every time you play one, that card goes away. So if you play the better cards in your deck, then you've spent it. So you're going to move slower unless you've saved up, unless you've kind of started slow, you're going to run out of energy at the end. But the other thing that happens is that whenever you end a round at the beginning, in front of everybody else, then you get an exhaustion card, which is a low numbered card that goes into your deck. So it does some of those things. But what I think was missing is that every card in the deck is just a number. And, that's fine. It's easy. But I'm thinking if you could make something similar where the cards that you have the opportunity to collect, you get to an aid station at a marathon, and now you've picked up some kind of power up that's going to show back up in your deck later. Maybe, it's a gummy, maybe, but you can make it fun. You can make it silly. I remember being at the 20-mile mark of the LA Marathon, and somebody was handing out little cups of beer, and I grabbed one. I was I was hurting by that point, and I was excited. I was feeling good enough, and I was like, I can take this. And almost immediately I drank that little cup of beer, and almost immediately I hit a wall. And it probably had nothing to do with the beer, but it probably wasn't a great idea anyway. But that's the type of thing, when you're at a marathon, people are handing out candy, people are cheering you on. So there's all these things that can happen during a marathon that can motivate you or get you excited that I think you could fit into a fun deck building experience.
Nice. Yeah, I could totally see that. You don't want it to feel like a marathon, though. I
No,
think.
no, exactly. Right. Nobody wants to sit through 4 hours of just like pain and plodding along. I don't know why we do it to ourselves, but you don't want to make that into a board game.
You could also, oh man, okay, this could be the thing. You could do training, like the first 3 rounds or something would be training, and that would be the part where you're building your deck, and then you finish it with the marathon and see how far you can get, and whoever gets the farthest wins. Or
There you go.
something like that.
That's a fun idea. Another racing game that did something fun but put a really silly theme on it was like Cubitos.
Oh yeah,
Which isn't a deck builder. They used a dice pool, which I found a bit fiddly. So I think I'd prefer a deck builder, but like even that worked pretty well. So yeah, I guess we don't have enough game designers that are marathon runners, I guess. It's a pretty big hobby. I'm surprised nobody's done that yet.
Yeah.
It's probably that they've tried it and it just is never fun. There's probably no way to make running a marathon fun.
I think it can be done. It's just a challenge. That's the fun thing about design. It's like, okay, I've got this idea. How do I make it actually fun?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I had one other idea. Now, this is not going to be very interesting to a lot of people, and it's outdated. It's not fresh anymore. But when I was first getting into the hobby and starting to listen to board game podcasts, I was usually doing this while training for races and stuff like that. But the other type of podcast I was listening to a lot at the time was political podcasts. This was, shortly before the 2016 election. That was such a circus. That whole, the election, the media coverage of the election, the characters that were in that 2016 US election, it was all so silly. And so I would sit there and listen to a game podcast and hear about game mechanisms, and my mind would start to insert in the silly events that had happened. And so I actually designed a game called 2016. I only got to a prototype stage with it, and it was all about essentially running for that election. But what was fun to me was that there were so many things that I don't think people even remember now, 4 years on, how ridiculous the coverage of that election was, and some of the events and the things that would get coverage and the things that were said and got away with, that you could insert those into a game and it would just seem like a caricature of politics, but it wouldn't be. It'd be totally real.
Yeah.
But my design was it was because I was fairly new in games. I was taking some mechanisms that I knew well, and the two that I kind of mixed together were worker placement and deck building, which is funny since that's been a popular blend lately. The worker placement was, and you were a candidate and you were sending out some of your workers out to different areas, but the workers were going to be specific, like people that were part of that election. They all had their own ability based on who they were. So they would go out and do different things like, raise money or, influence, like to have a media appearance and cause some influence. But the deck building part that I thought would have been fun to explore more was it was going to be set into 3 phases. And at the end of each phase, you'd have a debate. And so the deck building part was, it was a shared deck building where certain actions you could take would put an event into the debate deck. And then during the debate, it would be shuffled up and certain events would come up. Basically, certain topics would come up. And depending on who put it in there, it'd be beneficial or negative. And then there'd be scoring after the debate session. So pretty silly, I know, and not very interesting, I'm sure, to a lot of people. But to me, as somebody who was a political junkie at the time and just starting to get into board games, that the idea of taking that election and making a game out of it just seemed so entertaining to me. I got to a prototype phase on it, and then shortly after the 2016 election, I realized nobody ever wants to have anything to do with this ever again. So I scrapped it. I was just like, it's never going to be interesting to anyone. But I swear, in 10 years, looking back, you could actually take some of the events that happened and some of the media coverage and put that into a game, and people would just be laughing because they're like, there's no way that could happen in real life. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And it's hard on, like, you see things on Kickstarter, and both left and right leaning games never do well. Like, if it's a political game, it's likely not getting funded.
No, absolutely. And that was one of the challenges too, is obviously, like, if you have a stance in that election and almost everybody in the United States seems to have a strong opinion, you're going to hate something that gets represented in a game like that. So you've just cut out 50% of the audience in the first place. But
yeah,
and it never would have again made. But I still think I'd be interested if somebody did the right treatment of it. I think that could be a time period that is worth looking back at and hopefully learning from.
I mean, you could just make it a fictional. Well, you could have it be like aliens or something. Like
Yeah,
take
exactly.
away the historical people and
The names, right?
the names, yeah, and replace them with characters exactly like that don't resemble them, maybe. And you could probably do it.
Yeah, you totally could, but I almost think it would lose its, then it would just be a caricature and it would just be silly.
Yeah,
It's what makes it actually like worth exploring, I think, is the fact that these things actually happened.
very
But
true.
anyway, that was for me. I doubt there's many people outside of the 538 crowd that is going to be, interested at all. But it seemed like it would be fun to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've got a ridiculous theme real quick.
Okay.
This is pretty much what it'll tie into. I'm trying to do a ridiculous theme every time. Sometimes I forget. Making a podcast, editing a podcast, actually. So, like, you would have I don't know how you would do it necessarily, but like essentially having a guest, or maybe you have to decide your theme of your show and try and structure it and edit it, and how tight of an interview it is would give you more points. I don't know how it would work. It's a ridiculous theme.
Yeah, well, I've got Eurogame mechanisms running around in my head right now. Like there's competition. Think of almost like Obsession, where you had to compete for the best guest at the end of the round. So you have to do certain things to pull a guest in, and then you'll have to get the right resources to build up your equipment and the get right resources to I could see you putting that together. I mean that makes sense. I like it. I like it.
You just made it way, way better with that idea. I love that. That's the fun thing about ridiculous theme is sometimes you can just like collab on it, and then all of a sudden it takes form. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a blast. I love your show. Plug your stuff.
Thanks, Riley. I appreciate it. This was really fun for me as well, and it's been really fun hearing some of the other personalities you've had on the show. It's great. So love that you're doing this. So thanks again to everyone who already listens to us. But if you don't, you can find us at Board Game Hot Takes on any podcast platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever. Come out and check us out. You can find us on Twitter at BG_Hot Takes and on Facebook at Board Game Hot Takes. I'm generally a lot more active on Twitter. So if you actually want to interact and see regular updates other than just when we release a new show, Twitter is the place to follow us. If anyone is listening for the first time and you're intrigued, please check us out. I'd love to get more people in our community and share our love of games with all of you.
Thank you so much for listening. I had a lot of fun talking with Tim, and the podcast Board Game Hot Takes, probably my top 5 favorite podcasts to listen to. So if you haven't listened to it, go give it a listen. Way, way better than this podcast. This is a 2-star podcast at best, folks. Any of the other hot takers are welcome on the show. If you want to come on, just reach out. Let me know. I would love to have any of you. Some really quick news I'm going to try and go through. I got to play a couple of guests' games. So going all the way back to episode 1, Tim Lampasona, who works with the Cardboard Revolution Co-op, I got to play their game Mononoke, and I got to play it with a bunch of the designers. It was an absolute blast. It's like a mostly co-op game, but sometimes you got to be a little selfish and trick your teammates so that you can get one of your personal objectives done. It was a really, really interesting game. Eventually that'll be coming to Kickstarter, I think. I also got to play, going forward one episode, John Texaro Moffat's game, Night Soil. We talked about it in that episode. It's essentially a game where you go through like a medieval town collecting poop. And it's like a worker placement, but where you place your workers generates the poop cubes. And then you got to evacuate the cubes out of the city and collect them for money. But then you also have laborers it is just a really, really cool game. It seemed kind of intimidating at first. Like looking at it at first, I thought this isn't going to be that complicated. But then when we started learning it, I was like, whoa, there's way more to this than I expected. And I felt like I was going to be overwhelmed with everything. But within like the first round, it was just like, yeah, I understand what I'm doing. I got this. And I ended up absolutely killing it. I am King Poop over here. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends and leave a review. If there's something I can do better, you could always reach out and let me know too, because I am always looking at ways of improving. Maybe my format is way too scattered and I'm way too all over the place, but I don't ever prep for these types of things, really. I have 3 or 4 questions, and the rest I just leave up to wherever we end up going, just wherever the conversation goes, because I really want it to be an open, fun conversation. Someone left a 2-star review, but no feedback, which is fine. I just would love to know what to do better, because I am always looking at ways of improving the show. If there is someone out there in the board game community who you think would be a great guest, then let me know. I would love to reach out to them. I've reached out to a couple of people that have been requested, so hopefully they'll be coming on soon. In the show notes, you can find a link to Rick Lorenzen's GoFundMe, who was a contributor to this show, my last podcast, and also to Board Game Hot Takes. It's really cool to go back and listen to some of the older episodes where they'll read something Rick wrote in. And I just think it's really cool. Rick was such an amazing part of the community, and he's greatly, greatly missed. There's a GoFundMe to help take care of the kids that he left behind. You can follow me on Twitter or get in contact with me on Twitter or email at nerdoutwithus or the Board Game Community Show at gmail.com. Such a long email, am I right? ProtoCon was last week. Great success. It was a lot of fun. I played for 12 hours, hoping to do an episode that focuses on that soonish. But for now, you can just rest easy and know that it was an absolute blast. I gamed for 13 total hours, and 12 of those hours were consecutive. Woo! Exhausting. So thank you again for listening. I really, really appreciate all the support. And until next time, keep nerding out.